Happy Monday, everybody, and welcome to What Moves You. Start there. So, Alex, welcome to What Moves You. I'm super excited to have you. Thank you for welcoming me. And I'd love to start, I guess, most people I'm assuming that will listen might know you, but for those that don't, can you take us back a little bit to what got you into the mental health running space to begin with?
Yeah. So I've always dealt with mental illness. Like since I was a kid, I wasn't diagnosed until I was 20. I'm 30. But yeah, I've always had like issues with mental health, and it's always been something that was really difficult to navigate, especially in life, and, so I was kind of always open about it just because I know that if you don't be vocal about what you're struggling with, people can't really necessarily help you or understand how you're feeling, as like a physical illness. Yeah. And, the other issue with mental health is that it's so, now it's starting to be studied more, but there's a lot less understanding towards it. So that's definitely something that, I kind of had to grow into in order to get help. And then running has come. So I've said it like so many times, but running came in and out of my life, my whole life. But specifically when I was having a really rough time in my early 20s, I was diagnosed with really bad depression, and I'm still diagnosed with chronic depression and PTSD and all that. And it's a psychiatrist that told me, hey, have you considered doing physical exercise? And at that point, I was under 100 pounds. I was struggling with just getting out of bed. It was really bad. So I wasn't doing much sports. And they said, running is the best exercise to see a drastic change in mental health because of the high cardio. And all high cardio activities are what really kind of helps you deal with it. And we talk about runner's high, so it's kind of the same vibe that's happening, right? So I started running, and the psychiatrist told me, he's like, the statistic is if you run 3 times a week for 30 minutes, and this doesn't have to be like a 30 minutes 5K at super fast speed. Like you could like walk, run, but as long as you're out for 30 minutes 3 times a week, starting the first week, you will have a drastic change in your mental health in a positive way. So when he said that, I was like, well, 30 minutes isn't that much. Yeah. Like you can do that, after work, during your lunch break, anything. So I really committed into doing that because I was at this point where I was so fed up of not loving life. Yeah. And, and I'm so young, and, in my head I was like, I'm young and I already can't wait to die. Yeah. I know it's really dark, but like,
that's the reality, right?
But that's how I felt. And I was like, how am I supposed to get better or feel happy? And how can I spend my whole life feeling like this? So I was ready to do that and do work and try everything in my way of getting better. And so, so I started running. I fell in love with it, actually. So it became kind of one of my therapies. And from there, I've learned that I loved long distance running as well, just because it gave me this sense of accomplishment. Because that's another thing, is when you deal with mental illness, one of the issues is you lose confidence, self-esteem. And so for me, it was like, oh, I'm going to sign up to this 50K trail run and train and do it. And, that was my first ultra. And when I crossed the finish line, it was just so empowering that I was able to do that. And it gave me a boost of confidence, of happiness, of being proud of who I was. And so it kind of became like this drug where I'm like, okay, I'm going to do another one, and then I'm going to go a little bit further. And so that's kind of how it all mixed together. And I love doing running in social environments as well, just because I suffer with social anxiety. And so one of the biggest issues is making friends, being social, and all that can be really draining for me. And so I would spend most of my time, like I think it would be like 90% of my life, I would be alone. And so I knew that, you know, and this is one of the other issues with mental illness is isolation is really dangerous towards health, you know, particularly mental health. And so joining a few run clubs has enabled me to just go for a run, doing a sport that helps me feel better. But I also get to meet people and talk to people as well. And so it has that form of community. So I think that as well has like helped me. So that's kind of how it all came together. And
and I'd kind of like to go back in your story a little bit. So because I found that for me in my like path, I guess, to like caring this much and wanting to put mental illness on a mic and mental health in general, I think it was one of those things for me that although it ran in like our genes and some of our family members dealt with different things over the years, I think it's one of those things that until you live it and are affected by it, it's really, really difficult to understand. But I think sometimes if it's outside, I guess, of the stereotype of like what is like, what does someone who's mentally unhealthy look like, right? Like you kind of almost don't recognize it in yourself when you're feeling maybe lower or what have you. And so I'm curious to know, you said this is something that that you faced since really young. Like, how did that manifest itself for you at those young ages?
So it was just like, it was really hard because so when I was younger, obviously mental health wasn't really like talked about. And I would get crazy anxiety with going to school, going into the school bus, anything. Like I would be scared to see my own cousins. Like that's how stressed I was. But my dad never understood why. And he would like, sometimes I would spend the night in the bathroom, you know, not sleeping because of sore stomachs. And that's kind of how it would manifest is I would have like stomach aches, but like crazy stomach aches. And for the longest time, my dad couldn't understand what it was. And, you know, I was really young, so I don't really know what it is. You know, I'm just hurting and spending my nights in the bathroom. And that led to not me eating, you know, very few like things to eat because I was scared of getting a stomach ache or whatever. And so they thought that I was maybe lactose intolerant. So I stopped having milk and all dairy products. And for the longest time, I thought I was lactose intolerant because of that, but it turns out it wasn't really that. And then that's when, you know, I would go to therapy when I was a kid. And that's when the psychologist mentioned, you know, this isn't, you know, lactose intolerance. This isn't food intolerances or allergies. This is really what it is it's anxiety. And that's kind of how it's presenting itself. And then once we understood that that's anxiety, then it was like, okay, well, what can we do to help that? Is it going to the psychiatrist? Is it figuring out ways? Again, I wasn't on medication until I was maybe around 20, but back in the day, the only thing that was really available for children was going to a psychologist. It wasn't, you know, so it was a little bit difficult when I was a kid because even though I knew I had anxiety and my dad would kind of help me kind of navigate through it, it never really went away. And it was still as hard as it was. Like I never felt like I was getting better. And it wasn't until I was a lot older when I really started kind of taking my health into consideration and trying to figure out a way to deal with it. Because once again, you know, it was invading my personal life, my social life, my work life. Every aspect of my life was controlled by this anxiety, and it was making me isolate, going off work, having to quit my work and my passions and all that. So that's kind of how it started. And then I know that when I was diagnosed with really bad chronic depression. I'm pretty sure I was depressed way before that, but you know, that's the issue, is when you're getting diagnosed, like it can take years, and you know, it has to be by a psychiatrist, and you know, there's a huge percentage of people that are misdiagnosed as well. So, you know, for the longest time, my doctor thought I might have had autism, you know, because autism in women are completely different than what it is in men, and it can be really difficult. So we had to do all these tests to kind of figure out, okay, well, this is it. And but yeah, it's very it took a while before we really figured it out.
So it sounds like your dad was pretty open to like helping you along this process.
He was open, but he was also a little bit closed off.
Okay.
But I think that's like the issue with our you know, the generation, let's say baby boomers and older. Like I feel like they were never really taught to understand that mental health is as important as physical health. And so I know that, you know, my dad does have, you know, stress and these issues, but I don't think he was well equipped to deal with what I was going through. And this is by example. You know, there were a few times in my life where I was cutting myself, and, you know, I was in high school not having fun, and I wanted to take my life away and stuff like that. And, you know, he freaked out and took it way too far than what it should have been. And that's kind of the issue as well with parents, as I've seen, is like, you know, especially with men, is when they find out that someone's struggling mentally or physically, like they go right away to solutions without really listening and seeing what that person really needs, or take their time to find what they need. And I think that was what was happening. But it wasn't until 2019 I was married.
Oh, wow.
Like, okay. Yeah, I was married, but the marriage didn't last, you know, and in 2019, we decided to get a separation, but that was a really big trigger in my mental health. And I remember going to my dad's, and it was the holiday season, but I just found out that we were going to break up and all that. And it was really hard on me, because I honestly thought this was the love of my life. Right. And, you know, I still feel like this person was super important to me, and I felt abandoned. And I remember going into a dark spiral, and my dad was like, you know, think about something else, do this, do that. And at that moment, it was like, I can't do that. Like, I am suffering so hard, and I just wanted to leave. And so I took my car, left, and I was going through like a psychotic episode, and I was gonna like almost like, I just wanted to kill myself, you know, get in a car accident. And I ended up at the hospital. And when I was at the hospital, I was in a room, and the psychiatrist comes in, and we started discussing, and he's like, well, your dad and his wife are in the other room. And I was so scared to go see him, because I was like, oh my God, he's gonna be upset, I'm gonna be like whatever. And it was just terrible. And the psychiatrist told me, he told me exactly that men have a tendency of looking for solutions and stuff like that. So I don't think he means it in a bad way, but, you know, this is what can happen. And basically he went to talk to my dad and said, you know, what she needs right now is just love and understanding, and let her talk, let her feel what she feels. And once she feels better, then we can talk about therapy or adjusting her medication or figuring out that. And so when I left that room to go find my parents, I was so stressed out. And I just remember my dad opening his arms and just hugging me. And I felt like, oh, like, okay, he's not mad.
Yeah.
And ever since that episode, so it was a really bad episode, but ever since that episode, our relationship has been really better, because he understands, and he knows that when I'm not feeling okay, instead of telling me things to do, he's like, I understand your pain, and that's okay, and that's normal. But know that it's temporary, and that things are going to get better. And just our communication is a lot better. So, you know, I know that he's the best dad in the world, and I'm so happy and thankful to have had him. But I think that's an issue with the older generations, is that they were never taught about that. You know, you're suffering.
They didn't have the tools.
Yeah. Like, stop talking. You're fine. Don't talk about it, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And do you think that like that moment, and like, obviously I can't understand, and I am not going to try to, but do you think that that was one of the moments that like allowed you to feel more confident in speaking up about it? And I guess we're not even to the part of like when this became online and stuff like that, but even with your own family, like I know that like from personal experience, although it was not anything this like life or death related, not to make light of it, you are more hesitant to share and to open and like be honest about your feelings when you don't trust that you're going to be met with like a safe hug, as opposed to like do this and this and that. Do you think that was like a turning point for you where you maybe realized that, okay, like I can talk about it in a safe way? Or did you always feel open to talking about that stuff?
I think it was a little mixture of both. You know, I was always, you know, the thing about opening up, and this is so vulnerable, but you know, it's the perception of other people that can come into play. And so I think I know, and this is like years of therapy and years of, you know, dealing with my issues, that I've learned that the more I'm open about what I need and how I feel, the better I get the help I need and how I feel better. But that also brings a lot of attention, and you know, people can be really mean.
Yeah.
In the sense that, you know, sometimes I would talk about my struggles and stuff, and people would be like, oh, I think she's just doing it for attention, or, you know, and those are people that never necessarily dealt with mental illness or have known someone who dealt with mental illness. So there's always been that part of me that knows that opening up is important, but not only that, but because when I was in therapy, when I went to psychiatric hospitals and I've got help, I've been with people in focus groups that have dealt same or similar situations as mine, or even worse situations. And I've known that the more I open up, the more I feel like we're not alone, you know, because for the longest time I wouldn't really talk much, but I felt like this was just me. And if I talk about it, people are going to judge or going to think it's not true, or that I'm not valuable for what I'm feeling.
Yeah.
And when I started opening up a little bit on social media, I was getting, a lot of people came towards me saying, I've been feeling the same way. Like, you know, something you said so resonated with what I was feeling, and it made me feel less alone.
Yeah.
And I think that was kind of my motivation into learning how to talk about what I'm dealing with. One, because I'm strong enough now to talk about it. But two, mostly because I know that if I reach out and I say something, there's going to be other people that might be reading or listening and feeling a little less lonely. And that's the issue with mental illness, is we feel very alone. So if we know that there's other people in the world that are dealing the same thoughts and feelings, well, then we kind of understand and we feel a little more like valued or understood. Because, you know, a lot of times I would talk about it and sometimes I would get really negative feedback, or people that wouldn't be okay with it or not understand just because they've never really felt it. And but yeah, so it's a little bit of both, but I've been definitely more open about it since COVID, especially. But, you know, there's some days where I get a little nervous, and I think like opening up on certain things can be really stressful, just because, you know, you become so vulnerable. And sometimes I'll post something and I'm like, oh my God, is this too intense? Is this too deep? Should I delete it? What are people going to think? But then at the same time, how are we supposed to understand what people are dealing with if no one really talks about the really dark and difficult things, you know?
For sure. And I think I'd love to get into how that social media piece came in for you and the photography piece as well. But before, I was just going to say, I think in my short-lived experience of trying to be more open about this on the internet, on the podcast, on whatever you name it, I think some people might react negatively because it's something that they're jealous of, in the sense that they're struggling and they are not able to open up about it and speak about it and be that vulnerable, maybe with no one in their life. And you know, I try and have empathy for those people. It's not any better like receiving it, obviously, but I think that some people might just find themselves in a situation where it's easier to like get their anger and whatever they're feeling out in that way because they're not able to connect and be vulnerable.
Oh, definitely. And I mean, we're seeing it now with especially like the US elections and everything that's happening in the world. Like, I always tell myself, people that are angry and that judge and all that is because, like, they're not okay with themselves. Like, clearly they're dealing with things, and that's kind of how they've learned to express themselves, is through anger. And I believe that anger is never the lesson, but it's okay to feel angry. But it's learning how to use anger. If anger is is the emotion that brings you out when you're dealing with stuff, instead of knowing that, figure out a way to deal with that anger without hurting other people. And I mean, sadly, that's it. Like, we're seeing it a lot. And like, I have this like kind of thing that I've seen, you know, lately, ever since the election, we've been seeing a lot of hate crimes. Like, I've been seeing a lot of hate crimes. And the issue is like, there's so many people full of love, yet there's that very few people that are so angry that are doing hate crimes, that one hate crime explodes within the world, and it's crazy. So it's like we have no room for that. And I feel sad, kind of like how you're feeling. I feel empathetic for those people saying that, you know, like, of course, like, they're dealing with things, but at the same time, it's learning to use that energy towards something else, so that you're not, you know, hurting someone, because you don't know what someone's going through. Exactly. And you don't know that extent of hurt. Like, you know, someone just saying, oh, she's so ugly. Like, for you, it might not seem like something very harsh, but that person, if that person hears that, that could really destroy them, even if it was not like for you intentional, or, you know. So it's the power of words and actions. And I think people need to learn, and everyone deals with certain emotions. And if you're someone who deals with a lot more anger, well, figure out a way to channel that so that you're not hurting people around you. And you know, if you choose anger, that's on you, and you can just hurt yourself, but don't bring that on to other people, because they don't deserve that.
They don't. No, absolutely. And so given the state of the world, and that people are angry and sometimes they say things they shouldn't, how did you make the decision to like start talking about this online through your social media? And I'm also curious to hear how you got into photography.
Well, photography's always been, you know, I'm an artist, so I'm someone who loves art. When I was a kid, I would do drawings, paintings, everything. And photography came in my life when I was about 16. My dad got me a camera, and I would be, you know, just playing with my camera all the time. And that's kind of how I wanted to do my career. I was like, oh, I would love to be a photographer. And for a really long time, I've been doing it, and I love it because for me, photography has helped me. It's kind of like a form of therapy. It's art. It's enjoying playing with, you know, camera and light and nature. So it's really allowed me to kind of have a voice as well, for someone who's so introverted, to be able to use a camera and to express myself. So that's kind of how it became. And opening up with you know, my mental health struggles like it really came when I was really struggling a lot. And I remember doing one publication and it reached a lot of people. And that's when I figured out that I felt like not as alone. And I think from there, I would start sharing kind of my journey and saying, you know, like, this is what I'm dealing with. This is what I found to help me and all that. And trying to just help people, because in my head, it's like, if I do one publication to talk about it and I can reach at least one person to take care of themselves or to feel less lonely or to feel inspired by change, well, that's worth everything. And that's worth opening up, being vulnerable. And that's kind of how I feel. And also the fact that, you know, I feel strong enough to talk about it, maybe not at the beginning when I was really struggling, but now I'm strong enough to, you know, take on, you know, bullies if ever I have bullies or whatever. But I feel strong enough to open up, because being vulnerable is not easy. And I, you know, it's never easy. People think it's like, oh, you're just putting a publication up and all that, but it's very stressful, because you post it and then, you know, the first 24 hours you're like, oh, should I take it off?
Yeah.
Should I keep it? Is it too much? What am I going to do? What are brands going to think? What are my friends, my family? But it's never come to a point where, you know, something terrible happened, you know, and it's always helped people. So that's kind of how I feel. And it's like, it's important to talk about it, because not everyone is strong enough to talk about it. So if I'm strong enough to talk about it and I can change at least one person, it's worth it. And to my end. And it also allows me to meet other people or to connect with, you know, people that have been in similar situations, but that have evolved a lot further, and that can give me ways of getting better. So I think, you know, that's kind of where it came. And photography has just allowed me to express that a lot more, and to also, like, I would do a lot of nature photos and photos that kind of make me feel what I feel inside, and sharing that to people. So for people that don't really understand what mental health is, sometimes showing them, you know, a picture of a gloomy mountain, and then sharing in my message, you know, this is how I'm feeling. Sometimes that is just an interesting way of, you know, educating people. So
absolutely. And I think it's what I started with you off mic saying, is that one of the things that I think drew me to your content initially, and what I continue to admire, is that I think it takes a lot of courage to put your most like vulnerable moments online for people to have an opinion on, and for people to say things about. And like, yes, it helps, but like, it's a very scary thing, you know. Like just a few weeks ago, like I, you know, deal with anxiety just as much as perhaps the next person does, but I had a really bad week, and I had to take a week away from the podcast, like no socials, no nothing. And I was sitting there knowing that I was like prepping for this conversation today, and like, wow, like I like my first like reflex when that happens, and like when things get hard like that, is not to go put myself on social media, right? Like quite the opposite. Like I do find that it causes anxiety for me, so I step away from it. And so it takes like a lot of courage to like do that, and be willing to like, and yes, like you probably don't do it right in the moment, and like you take some time and feel it, but still like it's a lot and it's heavy. So like congratulate yourself in that, and like be proud of that, because it's no easy feat, you know? And so how did this, like it grew obviously because it resonated with so many people. And like, when did you first start working with brands and everything like that? Like the partnerships that you've created, like how did that come about for you?
Yeah. Well, how did it start? Right now I'm with, I've been partnering with CLA and Lululemon, and they've been like so amazing for me. Like I'm honestly so happy about my partnerships, but I guess it's just also because I was trying to work as a photographer and doing it full time. So I've been meeting a lot of people and having, you know, a lot of companies come for me to do photography work, which is amazing. And I think that's kind of how it kind of got started, and I've always knew that I wanted to do a bigger presence on mental health, but not exactly how. And, you know, my very first partnership was with MEC, so MEC, where I would do Nature for Mental Health, which was a small initiative where I would bring people struggling with mental health issues out doing nature activities. Then we've done rock climbing, we've done yoga on the beach. So a bunch of activities that are really expensive, you know. So people that are dealing with mental illness, they can't necessarily like afford doing that, you know, because it costs a lot of money, therapy and all that. And so you're adding like rock climbing, which is like one of the most expensive sports ever. So I wanted to do something like that because I knew that I was doing a lot of nature therapy work, and I did my yoga teacher training and forest bathing training. And I knew that nature is such an important way to heal, but a lot of people don't know enough about it.
I don't even think I've heard of forest bathing before.
So
you're gonna need to tell me about that.
So forest bathing is it's nature therapy. So it was brought up in Japan.
Okay.
And in Japan, doctors can prescribe to patients forest bathing for people that are dealing with a lot of grief or mental illness, whatever. And basically what it is, it's usually they walk in a forest, they do 1 kilometer, but out of that 1 kilometer, it takes an hour and a half, because they stop at multiple spots to do meditation and breathing exercise within nature. So that's basically what forest bathing is.
Okay.
And here in the Western sphere of the world, it's starting to get a little more popular, but it's really using nature and your senses as a form of therapy. So, and you know, nature therapy can come if you're trail running, if you're walking in Central Park in the middle of the city, but that there's nature. And what I found is, and you know, I love doing research about certain things like this, but 80% of the world population lives in big cities.
Yeah.
Okay. And out of that, I think it was something like, and I forget the exact statistic, but it was something like 70% of those people that are in the big cities have never gone outside of that big city. And you're looking at, for example, New York.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that don't have the budget, don't have cars, so they can't really go out
anywhere. Yeah.
You know, so they're in the city. They're lucky because they have Central Park, which is a beautiful park. But, you know, there's people, you know, in India and New Delhi that have no access, like, you know, it takes hours before getting into the forest. So, so it's crazy. And what that's happening is us as a human species, we're supposed to be out in nature. We're not made to be living in concrete. So that is one of the aspects to mental illness as well. So learning all those things makes you realize, okay, well, nature therapy is super important. And so how can we bring nature therapy to people that don't have the budget or that live in the cities and stuff like that? So basically Nature for Mental Health was this project that I did with MEC when I was partnered. And this was like in 2015, I'm going to say. And that's basically how my partnership with brands kind of grew, because I knew that I wanted to work with brands. But one, I'm not like a professional athlete. I'm not someone who's very intense in working out, but I use nature as a form of therapy. And I know that we can help a lot of people. And so the goal was to partner with brands to be able to bring people that need help out in nature doing what they love. And that's kind of how it started. So after Nature for Mental Health, that initiative with MEC, it was amazing. I absolutely loved it. But then I wanted to focus a little more maybe on running and yoga, because organizing a bunch of different activities can be really demanding. And also there's a lot of budget going towards that. So how can I have something that is going to be a little more accessible to create, and that I can do well, you know? And so I started, you know, partnering up with Lululemon, because I have this also initiative called Brain Run Club. And that's been going on for 3 years now, where we organize special, intimate nature experiences using movement. So like running. And this can be, you know, this is made for anyone to come. Yeah. So basically you don't have to be running a lot because we're going to be stopping. So it's kind of like forest bathing, but instead of doing 1 kilometer, we'll do between 3 and 5K ish, or usually it's around 5K. But every 500 meters to 1 kilometer, we stop and then we do a breathing exercise using one of the senses as well to help. And so it's super accessible. Anyone can join. Usually it's free. So the goal is to do always free events, or if they're not free, they're like super like $5 or on donation. And, you know, partnering up with the brands like CLA or Lululemon, they'll help finance certain parts. They will help give gifts or facilitate the thing, because the goal is to have it, you know, available for the community. Because that's another issue is, you know, I know that, you know, when you're struggling, it can be really expensive. And so, and with all the rises of food and home and everything, you know, a lot of people are struggling mentally and they can't afford to go to therapy. They can't afford to do all these things. So, you know, can we create some kind of community where people can just come and feel better? And then the goal is to have these experiences, but then also teach them how to do that back home, you know? And so we've done, you know, summit meditations where we would run up to the summit, we'll power hike and then meditate at the summit for the sunset and then come back down. Last summer we partnered with CLA. We do Sunday morning yoga, so once a month, where it was yoga based on breath work and anxiety release. Meditation runs are what we're most popular for. So that's really kind of cool. Where the brands came. And Lulu is, you know, they are so amazing because they love community. And for me, it's like partnering with a company that works with the community is super important. So, you know, I've done various work with different companies, and I know that, you know, there are certain companies that will use you or your initiatives for their publicity and their marketing, which is part of life, and that's part of marketing and how to grow business. But for me, it's more important to partner with brands that actually want to do an impact socially and that are doing the work behind doors as well. Because a lot of the time we're seeing, you know, inclusivity and all of that, but it's great to put people, you know, inclusivity and marketing, but what are you doing internally? And that's with helping your staff or hiring people that are living with disabilities, or, you know, making sure that people don't, you know, overwork and feel exhausted. So and CLA and Lululemon are so good with that, and that's why I like to partner with them, and that's super important for me. So and it's really exciting. Like I love their brand. I used to work for them back in the day, so it's kind of full circle moment. And they've been just so great with the community. We've organized like Sunday socials and, you know, meditation runs, and they've always been so generous. And I think that's what's important with partnership is not accepting anything, but to really see how those brands can elevate and help you, but how you can also help them.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, this brings me to like one of my biggest questions I have for you. So we were talking off mic at the beginning about your change in career. So you're studying full time to become a nurse. How do you fit all of this? So I'm curious into one, like, why nursing? What's the transition? Like, what's going on here? And two, how do you fit all of this into 1 week without, you know, overworking yourself?
Yeah. I'm still dealing with how to properly manage my time. So let's talk about my career change. I love photography, but realistically, as the years advance, I know that, you know, I was basing myself off commercial photography, and brands are kind of suffering lately. And there's so much competition. And the other issue is it's a very stressful environment. And I know that with what I'm dealing with, I could not work as much as I could. And so if you're not working as much as a photographer, then you're not making as much, and then you can't pay the bills. Like, you know, and that's the thing about photography is you have to always be working, always traveling, always doing these things. And realistically, I can't do that. You know, and it was really hard on my mental, to finally let go of something I've worked so hard into doing. And it took a while to understand that, you know, and I knew that, you know, I have to, you know, what else would I like to do with my life? You know, and for a really long time, I was thinking about it. Like, if I'm not going to do photography, what else am I going to do? And I really had no idea. And, you know, I'm struggling a lot with mental health. So for me, it's really hard to find something that, you know, I can feel valued at and important, you know, and that's something that I need. And so, my grandma is someone who was so important in my life, you know, and in the last few years of her life, we transferred her into, a really nice retirement home. So we sold her house in Ontario, and we were able to put her in a really, really nice retirement home. And I spent a lot of time with her, but she dealt with dementia at the end. And when I would go to visit her, I loved seeing the people working for her and helping her. And, you know, I struggle with really socially, but with seniors, like, it's super easy for me to feel comfortable and to enjoy their presence. And, you know, and so she passed away, and it was really hard on me, like a few years ago, and it's still hard on me. Like, she was someone who I would call literally every 2-3 days.
And the same with my grandmother.
For years.
So I totally relate.
She was my best friend, and she dealt with depression when I was feeling with depression. And so it was really hard. And, you know, when she passed away, it was COVID, and I could not go see her. So I remember just getting that phone call and learning and not being able to do anything. So it was really, really hard. But that brought me into, you know, a year or two later and thinking, you know, I would love to do something where I can impact people that need help. And I kept telling myself, what if I go work with seniors in senior homes, and I'm helping people that maybe don't even have family that come visit, or that are dealing with depression because, you know, they're there essentially because they're gonna die soon, you know? And how depressing can that be? And it can be very hard for people, and a lot of people just kind of ignore or forget about their seniors. Like, I know a lot of people in my circle that don't call their grandparents, you know, that don't go really visit them. And so I'm like, okay, maybe I can do something like that. And so, there's like the school next to my place, 10 minutes away. I went to visit. It's super small. They offer this nursing program where, you know, it's an intensive work, an intensive schooling, but you can work as a nurse. And my goal would be to go work in, you know, in senior living and being able to help, or palliative care, like, you know, something like that, where I know that I can really help improve the life of people that are struggling and not necessarily having as much support, and being able to help those people out. Because, you know, the thing in nursing is we have a lot of people that want to go into, you know, pediatric or kids, or, well, that is kids, but, you know, or people dealing with cancer and stuff like that, which is really great. But there's a lot of need for people in really vulnerable spots, like seniors homes and stuff. So for me, it was kind of like, okay, well, if I'm going to go do something that's going to impact people, that would be the best, like, community and the best job that I can really come and help. So that's kind of why I've decided to do it. And I started school in September, so it is still fresh. But So I'm learning how, because it's really intense. It's like Monday to Friday from 8 to 4. And, you know, and you have to study. Like, it's not something where you cannot study. Like, you need to study. And so weekends are studying. And then I'm trying to do a little bit of yoga, but also do a few photography contracts because, you know, money is, you know, you can't just not work. So it's been really hard, but I've been learning and adapting myself, but also really listening to myself, because I used to run a lot during the week, and now I'm running maybe like 20K a week. And it was hard for me, like maybe the first month, because it was like, oh, like I'm not working out, and like, you know, people are going to wonder, and, you know, my Strava activity is terrible. And, you know, like putting all this pressure on me, and I'm just like, but like, what, I'm gonna run like, you know, 50K a week and be exhausted and not have a life, you know, is that better? So I just decided to just kind of go with the flow and feel what I need. And I think that's something that I've learned in the more years advance, that learning of what you need and what you don't need, and just doing what you need, you know, as opposed to forcing yourself. And so I've had like, I've built this kind of like schedule where I wake up every morning at 5. That's my like, like my alarm's at 5. And I come down here, I make my coffee, and then I come up and I have 45 minutes in bed with my coffee, which is what I need. Just like go on social media, do whatever I want. But then at 6 a.m., I'm down here and I'm doing either yoga or I'm going out for a run. And it's one or the other, but I need to do that for 40 minutes. And then after that, get ready and go to school. And that's one of the issues, because I'm more of a morning person. So for me, it's like, if I don't do it, then by the time I get home,
you're not going to do it.
I'm not going to do it.
Same.
So I really need to, like, my boyfriend's the other way around. Like, you see, he can go to work and come home and go for a run, and that's fine. Really? But I'm not like that.
Me neither.
And especially in the winter, like, it's dark and you're like,
I know. Yesterday I was so happy. I think it was I don't know if you guys got it here, but we had like a 2-hour window, maybe like in the middle of the afternoon, where it was sunny. And I was like, hey, I need 15 minutes. I'm going for a walk. I'll come back to work in a second.
Good.
And it was just so needed. But no, I feel you. Winter is rough.
It's so rough. But I think like creating, you know, a schedule like that is so important. And, you know, I'm a huge fan of certain celebrities like Kim Kardashian, which people, when I say that, they're like, really? And, you know, that's her, like, she wakes up every morning at 6 in the morning to go do, you know, what she has to do. And I think it's a good way into motivating yourself into creating the schedule. And then once that schedule's done, yes, some days are harder, some days are not, but then at least you feel a little more accomplished. Yeah. And I think that's the goal as well, because if you're just going to school and you're doing it full time and you're not taking care of yourself, well, you're not going to last very long, or you're going to be sick and you're not going to feel well. So it's important to have those spaces for yourself, and it's figuring out if you're more of a morning person or if you're more of a night owl, like figure it out. But we all have at least 1 hour or 2 hours in our day where we can spend time for ourselves. Yeah. And sometimes we forget about it.
Yeah. And I think it's all a question of making it a priority, right? And I have, before I get into like the staple, like final few questions, I am curious to know, like, as someone who now is like very familiar with mental health, you're very aware and in tune with your own body, what you might need, what you might be feeling. I'd love to ask 2 different questions. One, I feel like contrary to most people, your social media isn't necessarily a highlight reel. We do see the real and the raw, but I'd love to hear like what you're struggling right now, and if there's anything like the community can pour into you and like help you through right now.
That's so kind. Honestly, and this is going to be super vulnerable, but honestly, like I've been feeling like sometimes I feel like I'm not valued. And I think that's something that I deal with since I was a kid, with abandonment issues and stuff like that. But I've always kind of tried to feel like, okay, I'm going to work and I'm going to try to make friends and feel valued within my community. And sometimes I feel like people tend to kind of push me to the side or not want to have me in within their community. And that can be also very mental to myself. And that's kind of why I kind of deal with that on my own. And I know that that's like a work towards myself. But I feel like the running community can be very closed off. And if you're not cool enough, it can be really hard to feel important. And I've been dealing that with like a lot of years where, you know, now I'm good. I have really good brands that have been supporting me, but I've also felt you know, not as cool as certain people or valued in the sense that, you know, that I can bring a value to certain communities or certain events and being part of something. And so that's what I find a little bit difficult. Like I've been in the running community for about 10 years. And I think, you know, since COVID, it has changed in the sense that running has been kind of like a trend and trail running and stuff, which is really cool because it's inspiring people to get out there, but it's also, bringing in, you know, influencers or people that, you know, are very popular to come in and to kind of take the big space. And then they're kind of putting away people that are working for grassroots initiatives or that are actually been there for a really long time. And I think that's what happens in every industry as well, is, you know, you have these trends coming in and, you know, which is great because it's bringing in influencers that have really high communities and a lot of followers, which is great. But at the same time, after that, I feel like brands or communities are pushing out the people that have been there and have built it. Yeah. You know, for people like that to come in just because they know that it will create a bigger hype, which is good. And I'm not saying it's bad. But at the same time, I'm seeing a lot of people, including myself, that have been kind of pushed off to the side and just kind of not taken as valued as those other people. So I think like that's one of the issues that I've been kind of dealing with and trying to fight and to be able to have my space as well in it. But at the same time, I know that, you know, I have great brands, I have great followers, and I have a great community behind me. Yeah. But I think like that's the thing that struggles with me the most in the industry right now is like, it's like that love-hate relationship of wanting to explode, but knowing that, you know, there's certain grassroots people and races and all that that have been completely put aside. Yeah. You know, and I think it's important to, especially in a perspective of inclusivity, like I think that, you know, running used to be, and especially trail running used to be so inclusive, and now it's been changing. Like you're seeing a lot less people that, you know, you have to wear you know, the $300 shoes, you need to get those you know, $500 kit to go running, you know, to go do your social run. And, you know, before COVID, people would come in with whatever they're wearing and come and run. So I think, you know, it's important to kind of remind ourselves that anyone can go run, that it's important to include everyone and everyone has their space. But I've found that we've lost that in the industry. And that's what I feel like is hard to kind of get back into or to feel more inclusive.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing that. And I think I can obviously only relate to certain parts, but I think in terms of being valued, like I definitely like feel that, like I'm with you right there. And I think like, obviously that perhaps manifests itself in different ways for me, but like, I think like even recently, like a lot of like this thing about the podcast, right? And it's the same for you, I imagine, with your photography and all of the clubs and the things that you do. You know, you put your heart and your soul and your time, and in hopes that like it will resonate with people and that people will like, hey, like that touched me, that did whatever. And like when that moment doesn't come the way that you might have expected it to, like it's really hard to like still like, okay, yeah, but that doesn't mean it didn't. Like, right? Just because they didn't reach out, just because it didn't have like the turnout that I thought it was going to have, like, it's still okay. Like, it doesn't mean that I'm doing this for nothing. And I think like that's a conversation that I have with myself so often of like, hey, like is it making you happy? Is it making you feel like you're accomplishing something and doing what you need to be doing? Then great.
And like, it takes a time to build an empire. Like, I like that aspect of like, sometimes we're doing a lot of things and we're feeling like we're not being seen, or we're not being as valued as other people or other initiatives or whatever. But I like to kind of remind myself when I kind of go in that space where it's like, oh, like I feel bad, I feel like I suck or whatever. And I try to bring myself to remembering that, you know, every day we're building towards something, and, you know, an empire is not grown from one night. It takes a while. And there are certain people that do explode, you know, but the reality is when you explode too fast or you go too far into something, half the time you're going to burn out. And so, you know, and I like to remind myself that, you know, it can be hard. But don't stop, and it's going to get better. And the more you do it, and the more you're consistent, it's going to get better. But
and I think one thing that I've like in realizing that this was something that impacted me so like much, I guess, because it didn't before, but all of a sudden you're putting yourself out there, so naturally you have something to lose, you have something for people to critique or love. But one of the things that I've been trying to put more energy into than the energy that I'm putting to the comparison culture and everything like that is, okay, well, how can I make more of like my self-worth and the value that I place on myself more focused on like me? Like, how do I bring that to myself instead of having to rely on other people? And that doesn't mean that like you completely like forget everyone else, because no, they're important. And like having a good partner and having a solid group of friends and, you know, supportive people around you, that is so, so important. However, like I'm trying not to seek validation from only other people.
And it's hard.
And more so for myself.
And it's very hard. Like, you know, we keep saying like, oh, we have to stop comparing and everything, but it's very ingrained. Like, we're human. Like, everyone compares. Like, and, you know, and I'm taking the example of Strava. Like, you know, like you go on Strava and you're like seeing what everyone is doing, and you're like, oh my God, like look at her pace, look at my pace. And, you know, and it's just like social media, like, oh my God, she has like 1,000 followers, I only have 10, you know? And it's like, it's always in comparison, which is a good thing in a way, but at the same time, you have to learn to not have it affect you. Because as soon as it affects you too much, that's where you go into that spiral. And then, you know, you're just in that negative spiral. But it's hard, and I'm still learning, you know, I'm super sensitive. I'm an artist as well. So it's like double whammy, you know, of like comparison and all that. But I try to remind myself that, you know, we're all unique. And at the end of the day, like, yes, it's okay to compare ourselves, but remind you that we're all on our own path and we're all kind of navigating it. And there's some people that are going to have lows, including you. And then there's some people that are going to have like highs. And, you know, it could be like you're in a low spot, that person's in a high spot, but, you know, it's going to interchange. And I think, you know, keep reminding ourselves about it is going to help us feel better. But, you know, you can't shake off that feeling. And I think, you know, that's something that we've always tried to do, is always just shake it off. But at the end of the day, it's important to feel those feelings, and it's valid. And I think, you know, talking about it, it can be really stressful. Like, you know, talking about it now and being like, you know, I don't feel valued or whatever. And it can be really stressful, because then you're like, oh my God, am I feeling like I need this? Or, but it's also just voicing how you're feeling, and your feelings are totally valid regardless of what other people think.
Absolutely.
You know?
And I think one thing, like I love giving people like tangible things that they can take away. And I think for anyone like that listened to that and like felt heard and felt seen, like I think one of the things that I've been trying to consciously do to try and like take myself back sometimes from that like anxiety spiral bubble of like, oh, I'm not this and I'm not this far and whatever. I no longer work out with any sort of tracker gadget or whatever. And I think like it's not a problem for all people, but I think if you are someone that finds yourself like constantly comparing, like, oh, like that ruined my workout because it wasn't at her pace or whatever it is, like try like literally just go run without your watch. And like for some people, like that's like no, like I cannot do that.
In that industry as well. Like my boyfriend spent 2 years without a watch, and honestly, like a couple years ago, I unfollowed everyone on Strava.
Yeah.
And I had zero, like I was following 0 people. I didn't care if people wanted to follow me or not. And some people took it personally. I learned after, and I was just like, it wasn't personal.
Yeah.
And that's what I kept telling everyone, like, it's not personal. It's like, I cannot go on my home feed and see every single activity. Like at this point, I was really struggling. And this was a few years ago. And I just started following people again, like certain of my really closest friends.
Yeah.
But you know, it's like, do what you need to do to feel better. And I think like, you know, we're in this culture where it's like, oh, that person blocked me, or that person muted me, or deleted, unfollowed me on social media. And we're taking it so personally. But at the same time, it's like, don't be unapologetic if you have to mute someone because that person's affecting you. Like, you know, and I've learned that, you know, the more you take care of yourself and you know that if following this person is going to give you more stress or anxiety, like it's not that person's fault. Like that person's can do whatever they want, but sometimes it's your emotions and you have to take care of yourself. And if you're feeling like that, well, it's okay to mute or to unfollow or whatever. And I think like other people need to also be okay with that and not take it always personally. And it can be hard to take things personally, but I've learned that, you know, at the end of the day, you know, and that's what I've told people is when, you know, there was a few people that got brushed the wrong way when they found out that I unfollowed them on Strava. And, you know, I had to call them and to have that discussion and say, it's nothing personal at all. Like, you're a great person. I'm dealing with anxiety and I've been over comparing myself like on my performances on Strava. And it was to a point where I was creating anxiety for myself. And that is the reason why I unfollowed everyone. And I needed to just kind of do things for myself. And I became better. And now I can follow people and I'm not as affected of going on Strava and being like, oh my God, I didn't run this much this week or whatever, you know. But, you know, that's one of the biggest, you know, things that I would tell people. Just do things for yourself. Don't do it and think, oh, but if I do this, is it going to affect this person and this person? And it might affect them. It might not, but just understand that. What do you need? Like, don't do it for other people. Do it for yourself. And if this is what you need, like, fine, do it, you know?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you look at like celebrities on Instagram, for example, like Taylor Swift, she follows 0 people, like, you know, so it's like, it doesn't mean that you're unfriendly or you don't want to be friends with anyone. It's just like, there's so many people and there's so many initiatives and there's so many things that if you're someone who is prone to comparing yourself to others or have a weak, you know, self-esteem and stuff, sometimes just doing certain things can just help you. And then you get rewired and then you try again. And if you still feel not good, you can go back, and that's what's important.
And for those of you that are listening that like it's running isn't your thing and it's not the Strava app that's like making you self-conscious, like I think it's as silly as like for me, and I've noticed it so like profoundly, which is like when I'm going to say this and you're going to be, and like people are going to be like, this is so simple. Yes, but we live in a world that doesn't do it. I have been so like strict with myself on allowing like a good chunk of time in my mornings and in my evenings that I do not open my phone.
That's
like
so
I
good.
Don't touch it. And like in the morning, I don't wake up at 5, but I do have my morning like non-negotiable things, and like you won't catch me on my phone until 8 when my workday is starting.
That's
and
so
at night,
good.
like at 7 o'clock, like my phone is put away. And like sometimes it happens and like I slip up and whatever, but like I found that like something as simple as that like is so quick to reconnect you to like real life and the real world and people around you. And like I found that super helpful. So
it's crazy. Like, and phone, like our phones have become part of us, you know, and it can be like, I've, you know, just being at school, like so in my class, I have people that are a lot older and I have people that just came out of high school.
Yeah.
And usually the girls that just came out of high school, they are so on their phones. Like they cannot put their phone down for a class. And it's crazy knowing that it's become so important in someone's life that you can't live without. And then you have the older people that don't really care. And I've learned that, like, so before I went to school, I was on my phone all the time. And I knew deep down that it's not good. Like, I know that, you know, your screen time is not good and that you need to take breaks. But I couldn't, you know, and that was anxiety and it was stressful. And it was kind of like an addiction of being on my screen all the time. And school started and it was the first time that I would not look at my phone unless the class was done. So 3 hours before I get to look at my phone. And it's helped me so much because it was like, oh, like I have no choice. I can't be on my phone all the time. And so I was struggling. Like I have a lot of friends that like they wake up in the morning and they don't go on their phone until 8 or whatever. And I think that's so amazing. But for me, it was so hard to do. Yeah. And so going back to school, I had no choice and it helped me and it feels so good. Like I don't have to have it with me all the time. And then the days where I forget it or whatever, it's not like having a panic attack because I'm not on my phone. It's like, okay, well, I can deal with it, but it's crazy. Yeah. And, you know, and I'm not telling people to do it, you know, starting today, you leave your phone because it takes time. Yeah. And I think like, it's kind of like, it's an addiction and that's an addiction, you know, it's just like alcohol and all that. You can't just cold turkey cut. Well, I mean, you could, but like, it's very hard to stay long if you cold turkey it. So, you know, my idea is like put, you know, a timer within your day where 2 hours you're not going to have your phone with you and go do something or whatever. And I love the aspect of not going for a run without your watch or anything. Like I do it sometimes and it feels just so good. It's like, oh, like, you know, and I'm with people that are so obsessed with, you know, their watch that if they don't have it, they're like, oh, you're going to have to tag me and everything. And I'm like,
workout's ruined.
Yeah.
Might as well just not have it come.
But that's it. And the saying is like, if it's not on Strava, it doesn't count. And you're like, but guys, like, you know, and, so yeah, but I mean, you know, it's good and bad, and it's learning to kind of take it all at once and seeing what you're overdoing, because too much of something is not good, and to be able to balance yourself. And, you know, the first step is acknowledging that you have, you know, issues with, you know, addiction with your phone or with running or with whatever you have in your life. And just acknowledging it and being like, okay, well, what can I do to help, and without doing something too drastic, you know, and sometimes it's just spending, you know, 30 minutes without your phone, if that's something that you can do, you know, on a regular basis. But
absolutely. And I think that transitions really well into like my two next questions, which you can tell me if you prefer to skip it, but I find that I'm curious to know how you handle your like relationships, more specifically, like in this case, like your romantic relationship, but I guess this applies across the board. When, and I don't know if this is your situation, but I find like sometimes you are maybe someone that deals with a lot of mental health struggles and your partner is not. Maybe, I don't know, you're about to tell me. How do you handle that? If someone is currently like in a relationship with someone who's never really struggled, how do you give them advice on like how to properly express what they're going through?
Yeah, it can be so hard. Like being in relationships is hard as it gets, but when you're dealing with mental health issues, it can be really difficult, just because, especially if that person doesn't understand or has never lived with it. You know, my boyfriend has had depression, so he knows what it feels like, but my ex never had it, you know, and so that was really hard. And I think that's one of the reasons why the relationship ended, was because at the time I was struggling with opening up and expressing what I needed. And so I would spend all my days not doing anything, being super sick. I would be like, I was under 100 pounds. It was like to a point where it was really bad. And he would come home from work every day and just see me laying on the bed, not doing anything. And so I think it was really hard because we never really had conversations about what I needed and what he needed and being respectful both ways. If I could give a tip is to really have a good communication, because communication is what really enables you to have a deeper relationship and a deeper understanding. And as easy as it seems, it can be really hard, but to understand what you need and what you don't need. And also talking to your significant other about how you're feeling, you know, and what happens when, you know, you're having an anxiety attack or you're really not feeling well. And this is, once again, especially guys, they have tendencies of opening up a little less, and women have tendencies of opening up too much. So it's really finding that balance, but really just being honest. And for example, like my boyfriend knows, you know, I struggle with anxiety. I have anxiety attacks and certain things like that. So, you know, I told him when I'm having a really bad day, I just need you to be there. Like, just be there. We don't necessarily have to do anything, but I don't want to be alone. And he knows that. And every time I have a really bad day or whatever, even if we're not physically there, I will text him and he will call me. Like, what do you need? You know? And it's super important of voicing what you need, because a lot of the times people will feel down, they'll struggle, and they won't really tell what they need because they don't want to be a bother. But then that creates tension because that other person maybe thinks that you don't value them enough, or maybe feels like, oh, she doesn't seem to appreciate me because she's in her corner and not talking. And so that's where it causes friction. And I think, you know, talking about it, knowing what you need and knowing your limit. And this is, for example, like I'm someone who has social anxiety, and my boyfriend has a huge family. Like a huge family. They have family dinners almost all the time. They have birthdays all over the place because they're such a big family. And so he knows that for me, going into family settings like that can be really triggering for me. So, you know, there are some times, you know, there are maybe, you know, a Thanksgiving dinner where I won't go and he won't take it personally, you know? And I think that's what's important as well, is like, you know, and this is like Christmas is coming up, and, you know, it's like, I can't do a million Christmas dinners. Like, don't, and for me, I'm more of a morning person. So he knows that. So he will try to organize maybe more family brunches because he knows that, you know, at night I get really stressed and anxious, and I need to take my medication and be in my own bubble. And so for him, it's like, okay, well, we can't always have breakfasts, but we'll try to organize, you know, let's say Christmas, hey, can we organize like a Christmas brunch with his family? Because then at least, you know, it's better for me. And so knowing, you know, how to navigate through those, it's okay. And, you know, they also need to understand that if you say no, it's not because you don't want to, it's because you need that own space. And absolutely. So, you know, and I'm taking the example yesterday was, my boyfriend's Christmas dinner with his work, and, you know, we were all invited, like their significant others, family and kids. And I really wanted to go, but I had such a bad mental health day. You know, and I was at school and it was so stressful. There was a lot of people, and I got home and I was just so exhausted. And, you know, I told him, I was like, I don't think I can come tonight because as much as I want to go, you know, I'm going to be so mentally exhausted and not well, and I need to be alone in my space. And he totally understood and was not upset. And it was like, it's okay. Like, message me if you need to call me, and, you know, it's okay. I understand. So I think it's really communication and knowing what you need and what you don't need, and, understanding to not take it personally as well as someone says no, because it's not because they don't want to, it's because, you know, for them, that's what they need. So yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And I think this brings me really nicely to my last question. I've got one more after this, but one last main question. What are your like daily, weekly, like mental health non-negotiables?
So waking up at 5 a.m. during the week, like definitely my vibe. And I love breathing exercises. I actually have a lot of things. So like I love waking up and doing my breathing exercises. I think that's so important. I do need to
I want the details. What are breathing exercises?
There's different breathing exercises, but I have this app that's called Open, and it's a yoga studio in LA, and they do a lot of breath work and meditation, guided meditation. Sweet. And I think like ever since I've started doing guided meditation and guided breathing exercises, it's been helping me deal with stress and anxiety. So I love to do that. And every day they have a new one that comes out so you can listen to it. And basically they have meditation, breathing, yoga, and then sound baths. And so you can, and every day it's a new one. So cool. I enjoy doing that. It's kind of like my little moment where, I commit to being on my mat.
And you do that in the morning when you wake up?
I do that in the morning. So yeah, I wake up at 5 and then at 6 a.m. I'm on my mat and I'm doing that. And it takes about 40 minutes. And so that it's important for me to, at 7 p.m., I make my tea, I go upstairs in my bed, I light my little candle, and I either study or I read a book. So, I'm not on my phone, no more screen time at night past 7. And it's just taking a minute to kind of get ready to get to bed. So, I really enjoy reading. I love reading. And now that school started, there's just so much studying. So I'll just read my notes and what I need to do for school and stuff. So that's super important for me. And then, making sure that I do like a few yoga throughout the week, but that I also go run. Yeah. So I think like that's really important. I don't drink a lot of alcohol. I'm not like anti-alcohol, but for me, it's like, I feel like I'm better when I don't drink. Either, and so, and I'll drink like once in a while, like, my boyfriend loves beer and he loves, like local brewers and all that. And so he'll always have beer. And then every once in a while I'll be like, okay, I'll have one, or like, let's share one, but yeah. And then honestly, what's important for me as well as eating, and I struggle with cooking and all that, but I've learned that, and this is again, studies and all that have shown that, when you actually make real food, and you eat real food, it has a really big impact on your mental health. So just learning to eat, real food and not buying, like frozen food or whatever, which I used to do a lot. So, learning to just have more of that like healthier lifestyle, because I know that just kind of complements how I feel. So I think like those are really my non-negotiables throughout the week. And,
love that.
Yeah.
And piece of advice on the food front, because I know you don't know this about me, but I have a pretty strict diet, not by choice, but by necessity, of different intolerances and whatnot. And one of the things that I find so helpful, do you guys have a Costco near here? Like how far is it?
Well, we haven't, but it's like in Boisbriand. So it's really like, it's not really far. It's like 40 minutes.
Okay.
I know.
So you're not going, because for anyone else that's listening, they have a pack, like a brand, of like frozen veggies. They're mixed and they're like seasoned oil, everything. And they're good. Like it's not crap ingredients. Like it's an avocado oil, the whole shebang. Anyway, just spices. But they have like just like a veggie, like stir fry mix. And then they have like root vegetables, like sweet potatoes and carrots and parsley. For the like lazy cooker who just like wants to get more vegetables but doesn't know how, and the whole buying and chopping and like coming up with all of it seems tedious, like you can get the big bags. I think the brand is Pura Vida at Costco.
I'm gonna check it out.
And it's so quick, and you can like then you have to do is like cook up some chicken or some steak or what have you, put it in a little bowl, and then you've got everything. That's crazy, need, right?
And I've learned that like, and this is in my nutrition class, that like frozen veggies and frozen fruit are actually sometimes better than the actual ones that you buy, because they're usually super fresh and then they're frozen directly.
Yeah, exactly.
As opposed as like the bananas or, certain veggies that have been there for a long time. And when I found that, I was like, oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So that's my tip. I do that all the time, especially for like lunch and breakfast. All right. I have one last question for you. I'm going to stop boring you with Costco vegetables, but the podcast is called What Moves You. I named it this because during my rougher season of life where I was being diagnosed with a few different things all at the same time and like trying to work back up to like feeling like myself again, this is a question that I came back to basically every day, and kind of in the same way that you would like a gratitude list or like, what am I doing for me today? But really like, what makes me smile? What makes me want to get out of bed? And I feel like sometimes, especially in those low moments, it's hard to picture like the big picture. It's hard to like set your mind to big things and big objectives like careers and whatnot. And like sometimes that is what's needed, but also I think it can be so beneficial to come back to the small things and remind us of like the small things that we do for ourselves and that bring us joy and that make us feel accomplished and valued. And so I'd love to hear what would be those things for you. What moves you?
That's a good question. I think what moves me is just being a better person for myself, but also for people around me, because I just, I'm so proud of myself going back to school, and I'm 30 and all that, and I'm just doing it. And every time, sometimes it's really hard, and, I'm in class and I'm like, oh, I could just go run today. It's so nice. But, I want to become a better person for myself, and I want to be really proud of myself within, 30 years from now when I'm going to have kids and, be like, I struggled with a lot of things, but you know what? I was able to, be a really financially stable, to have a good social circle, to be able to be fit and to be able to do activities and to have a great relationship. And so I think that's really my motivation, is just becoming a better person and being really proud of myself and being able to look back and be like, wow, like 10 years ago, I thought maybe I was gonna, not be part of this world anymore. And now I'm like, wow, like if I would have taken my life away, I wouldn't be here right now. And I wouldn't be doing incredible things and helping the community and also becoming a better person and learning to love myself. So I think it's definitely that. It's just being, improving myself every day and proving to myself that I can do big things, but also, just full of gratitude about, never giving up. And that brings me to everyone out there that feels really low or that's dealing with really rough moments in life. Like, just don't give up, because there is a light at the end of the tunnel, even if we're not seeing it or we're super far. But there is one, and it's there. It's just, you have to keep fighting for it. So
absolutely. And I won't be able to top that, so I'm going to stop right there. But Alex, thank you so much for your vulnerability today. And I know like so many parts of this conversation resonated with me, and I know that it will with people that are listening. So thank you. And this is longer than I normally record for. So for everyone who's still with us, thank you so much. And
well, thanks for having me and coming up here. So hopefully you get to enjoy the Laurentians.
I will. So thank you guys. See you next Monday.